As one component of civic space, the mission covers freedom of expression in general and with a particular focus on a safe environment for civil society and human rights defenders who exercise this freedom. Such safety requires adequate responses to attacks against activists and a suitable legislative framework for functioning of civil society institutions. As mentioned in the previous lecture, in order to gather first-hand information, we conduct confidential interviews with victims and witnesses of human rights violations. We monitor trials and conduct meetings, for instance, with law enforcement. We also maintain contacts with relevant human rights defenders and partners as additional sources of information. One of our most effective tools is the release of public statements and reports. The situation of civil society and human rights defenders is reflected in every quarterly report. Furthermore, the mission also releases thematic reports. One of these was released in March 2019. This report that I mentioned earlier was particularly focused on the condition of civic space ahead of elections this year. As an example of successful advocacy, we can use a very recent development. The mission, as many others, advocated against excessive financial reporting requirements for certain categories of civil society activists, also known as e-declarations. Recently, the Constitutional Court of Ukraine recognized such requirements as unconstitutional. We believe that this type of joint efforts with civil society and human rights defenders themselves, as well as other actors such as the Council of Europe and the EU, can bring good results. Any physical attack is the worst thing that can happen to a civil society activist or human rights defender. As part of our work, we record each case that could be verified at least through 3 independent sources. Then, with the victim's consent, we deliver the story to the international community. Bringing every such case to the attention of the public decreases the chances of similar attacks because potential perpetrators have to fear prosecution. In cases where the mission sees a possibility of advocacy intervention, we also can directly communicate with law enforcement to focus or increase efficiency of their efforts. In some cases, the mission also considers trial monitoring as a tool for protection. Sometimes our presence during hearings was considered as additional protection for victims, their lawyers, and even sometimes the judges. For example, where supporters of the attackers attend the hearing and intimidate trial participants. In addition to direct activities of the mission that I mentioned earlier, just to remind, public reporting, protection by presence, advocacy interventions, we can also assist in providing information and submitting complaints to the UN special procedures with victims' consent. Then, we can also share the story to request assistance from other actors, such as international organizations or NGOs. Sometimes, such referrals provide essential support to victims. The Human Rights Council is an intergovernmental body within the United Nations system responsible for strengthening the promotion and protection of human rights around the globe and for addressing situations of human rights violations and making recommendations on them. The Council is made up of 47 United Nations member states, which are elected by the UN General Assembly for 3 years. In order to promote and monitor human rights worldwide, the United Nations Human Rights Council establishes special procedures. Special procedures are individual, independent human rights experts or groups of such experts who report and advise on human rights issues. They can be called special rapporteurs, special representatives, working groups, and independent experts. Special procedures have either thematic or country-specific mandates. A link to special procedures is also available on the screen. Recently, the mission assisted the UN independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in his 10-day visit to Ukraine. Before this, in 2018, we also contributed to organizing the visit of the UN independent expert on foreign debt, other financial obligations, and human rights. In June 2018, 3 special procedures on national minorities, racial discrimination, and housing issued a strong statement regarding attacks on Roma settlements, after which the Minister of Interior of Ukraine publicly called to improve efficiency of investigations, and the series of attacks eventually ceased. In case of an individual human rights violation, or if there is a pattern of concern, victims or their representatives can submit individual cases to special procedures mandate holders. Special procedures mandate holders can turn to the government to ask for explanations in follow-up to complaints and to protect individuals. It is worth mentioning that a special mandate also exists for human rights defenders. The mandate was established in 2000 by the Commission on Human Rights to support implementation of the 1998 Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. Civil society actors can support individuals seeking protection from human rights abuses through special procedures. As I mentioned earlier, the mission can assist in submitting cases to them and does so regularly. Besides, we also cooperate with and provide expertise to human rights treaty bodies. You can see a link to them on the screen. These treaty bodies are committees of independent experts, and they monitor implementation of core international human rights treaties and issue recommendations to governments on implementation of treaties such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. By the way, activists and human rights defenders can also support these bodies with information and, through them, make their own calls to the government on specific human rights concerns stronger. The United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine supports civil society. We believe that educating activists to improve their protection is essential for building a powerful and effective civil society and human rights defenders in Ukraine. While contributing to protection of individual civil society activists and human rights defenders, we believe that we are contributing to the protection of all. We know that everywhere, and especially here in Ukraine, civil society is key to protect human rights for everyone. Now you know how the UN perceives civil society, what is the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, what are human rights defenders and how international law protects them, the role of the mission in protecting activists, what are the main challenges to civic space in Ukraine, what is the mission's role in protecting activists, and finally, what are UN special procedures? If you wish to follow us, you can see all the links on the screen. Thank you for your interest.